Good morning. Today we look at John 19, verses 1 through 22. Pilate has talked with the religious leaders and tried to release Jesus, and they have cried out for Barabbas. And verse 1 of chapter 19 says, Pilate then took Jesus and had him flogged. He didn't find any guilt in Jesus. He didn't see any real reason for it, but this was, maybe just the first attempt to satisfy these Jewish leaders. And we had him flogged. And while that was going on, it says the soldiers wove a crown of thorns and put it on his head and dressed him in a purple robe. And the crown of thorns was mockery for sure. I mean, a king is crowned with a fancy crown, a golden crown, a bejeweled crown or something, not a crown of thorns that would poke and hurt and cause blood and pain and agony. But the purple cloth was a symbol of royalty. Purple was a very expensive dye, and it wasn't common, real common. But for them to put a purple robe on Jesus, indicated, somewhat of royalty, but also, again, it was done in a mocking fashion by these soldiers. And verse 3 says they kept coming up to him saying, "Hey, hail, King of the Jews." And, to say hail to the king or Hosanna to the highest, that's a praise, that's an honor. But, when you're saying it with a mocking tone, it's not. And we know how those tones can change. So they kept coming up, mocking him with hail, King of the Jews, and it says, striking him on the face. And then Pilate went out again to the leaders. I mean, it was the temple police, the chief priests, the scribes, the Pharisees. These were the people that had brought Jesus to Pilate. And Pilate says to them, I find no case against this man. I find him innocent. There's no reason for this, And as he was speaking, then he has the soldiers bring Jesus out with the purple robe and the crown of thorns on. And Pilate says to him, here he is. I find no guilt in him. I want to let him go, is what Pilate said. But John writes, when the chief priests and the police saw him, they shouted, crucify him, crucify him. And so John, the gospel writer, is much more specific in, it's the chief priests and the scribes, the Pharisees and the police, of the temple are the ones that are, they're stirring the crowd up, and they're the ones that begin to cry, crucify, crucify. And Pilate says, take him yourself and crucify him, because I find no case against him. I find no guilt in him. I see no reason for this. But the crowds, the Jews, it says again and again, referring to mostly the religious leaders, said, we have a law that, says that anyone who calls himself God has to die, and but yet they don't have the authority. And when they said this, when they told Pilate that, we have this law that according to law he has to die because he claims to be the Son of God, it says that Pilate was more afraid than ever. He didn't understand why they were so upset with Jesus. He didn't understand or know how he was being manipulated. And he just, this is early in the morning, and the religious leaders have been talking with Jesus, all night long, and now it continues. But Pilate doesn't know what's going on, and he enters his headquarters again, it says, and he asks Jesus, where are you from? That's quite a question. Where are you from? Because, he's just heard the religious leader say he claims to be the Son of God. So if Jesus were to properly answer, where are you from? he would say from heaven, from the right hand of God, I've come from the Father to the earth to be with you. I mean, this would be the answer. And who would really accept that? I mean, this was one of the things that the Jews, the people, most of them couldn't handle, was that Jesus was and is the Messiah. But Jesus didn't answer, and Pilate was surprised by that. He says, do you not answer me? Don't you know that I have power over life or death for you? And Jesus' response is, you have no power over me other than what is given from above. And so Jesus is saying to Pilate and to everybody, I mean, that the power that we earthlings have over Jesus is nothing. I mean, the only reason that Pilate, the Roman soldiers or anyone could crucify Jesus was because God allowed it to happen. And that's the reality. And verse 12 says, from then on, Pilate tried to release him. I mean, Pilate had been trying to let Jesus go. He'd been proclaiming him innocent, proclaiming him, not worthy of any of this. The flogging, the beating, the mocking. Pilate knew that Jesus was innocent. Pilate knew that there was no guilt in Jesus, that he should be set free. And so then the Jews cried out, if you release this man, you are no friend of the emperor. Whoever claims to be a king sets himself against the emperor. And so this was another charge. And it says then that Pilate heard these words. He brought Jesus outside again and sat down. And Pilate sat down on the judgment seat and said to the people, here is your king. And again, they cried out, mocking him, away with him, take him away, crucify him. And Pilate asks, shall I crucify your king? And they respond, we have no king but Caesar. Forgetting first commandment, you shall have no other gods. I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods. You shall worship no one other than me. But they didn't listen to and follow Jesus. So Pilate then handed him over to Jesus, or handed Jesus over to the crowds, to the soldiers, to have him crucified. And Jesus carried the cross out to the place called the Skull. And it says that many of the Jews read the inscription that Pilate had put upon the cross, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Fact number one, Jesus of Nazareth. That's where he's from. Second fact, King of the Jews. Very true. But the religious leaders and the people didn't like that because it was written in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin, so that anyone who could read any of those three languages would know what it said. And they argued, do not write that. But Pilate says to them, what I have written, I have written. This is truth. Pilate asked Jesus, what is truth? And I think, as I read this crucifixion story over and over, every time I read it, and we've read it this is the fourth gospel we're reading it in this year again. But I see in Pilate that he comes to believe who Jesus is. He sees no guilt in Jesus. He sees, this, he sees the reality. But yet, being a Roman, it doesn't have the hold on Pilate. But yet, we read in other Gospels of Pilate's wife saying, wash your hands of this man. Have nothing to do with this man. I've had awful nightmares because of this man. But Pilate, has seen in Jesus no guilt, no reason for this. And so he has listened to Jesus. And when Jesus says, I'm not of this world. My kingdom is not of this world. I think Pilate understands a lot more than the religious leaders were able to. We understand too. Jesus, Son of God, came to earth for you and for me. Tomorrow morning we have worship at 9 o'clock at Mabel in Sutton, and at 10:30 at Our Savior's in McHenry. I'll be live at 9 o'clock from Mabel and invite you to join me there for worship. Thanks for tuning in today.